So how does memory work? Well, we know that memory anchors all learning and performances on tasks and as well as at work. Um, we know that in order to remember, help you remember, memorize things that are important, we know that you may need some techniques to help you better understand things. So whenever you try to memorize, make sure that you are in a comfortable place with no noise around you or anything like that to disturb you, and you can just focus on what you're doing. Now the question is, how does memory work? How does memory work, Janika?
It's a process.
Process.
Process of important things. Process of. It's a process of important things. It's a process of value. It's a process of.
It's a process of just getting to know the material that's in front of you. You know, to try to memorize what you think you know, might know and might not know.
Okay, that's good. How about you, Marvin? How do you think memory works?
Um, memory work depends on based on what you're trying to learn. Because you know, if you're comfortable with what you're trying to get, what you're trying to remember, then it's a better chance that you will remember it.
That's good. Well, you know that there are long-term and short-term memories.
Yeah.
You know what those do?
Yeah, long-term memory is like more of things that you store over a longer period of time. But a short-term memory is like more like something, you know, you have stored for not like that long. But am I right?
Yep, that's right. And then we have sensory register, which is what brain filters through, which sensory information enters, and the brain is sent to short-term memory.
Well, that's it for how does memory work. So next up, we got to talk about how can you remember what you studied. That's a good question. How can we remember what we studied? Well, first, as an individual, we got to ask ourselves like questions. We got to ask ourselves questions that help us to engage in an activity, like when, where, or who, you know. So let's start with when. Like a lot of people have time, don't like a lot of people got to figure out how much time they got and where, when, what time they got to study, right? And then where, like they got to pick a place that they're comfortable and a place that the environment that they feel good to study in. And who, talk about like who they want to study with. A lot of people like studying alone. What about you? You like to study alone or with group?
I study alone.
And she like to study alone. She like to study with a group. So it's a process.
Yeah. Because I, for example,
And as we were saying too, is like you got to know what you want to study and why you want to study it. Because a lot of people get stuff confused with what they actually trying to get from the material. You get what I'm saying? So it's like what you want to study, you got to find like what directly in the particular like
What interests you?
Yeah, you know, and then why you want to study, you got to know the reason, because you don't want to study something that you already know. So you got to have a reason to why you want to study. And the most important part, I think personally, is how you want to study, because a lot of people, like the way they approach it is like they approach it the wrong way, so they never get the information. So the best way to study it is to kind of get a little emotional connection to what you're trying to study, trying to get a feel for it so it won't be as boring. Because if you think it's boring, then it's going to be boring.
Right.
So that's basically like the questions you got to ask yourself, like how you going to study it, why you want to study it, what you want to study, when you want to study, who you want to study with, and you know when you want to study. So that's basically it. So now what we gonna talk about? What we got next to talk about to the people?
well, next is Janika.
How can mnemonic devices boost recall?
What is mnemonic?
What is mnemonic device?
What is
Memory techniques that use vivid associations and acronyms to link new information to what you already know.
That sounds interesting.
Yeah.
Sounds a bit complicated, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
It does sound complicated.
But you can also create visual images and associations.
Don't it take time and effort to create as well?
Yeah, it does.
You have to be motivated to remember them.
Yeah, say as example, you're trying to learn a Spanish vocabulary, including words.
Yeah.
Instead of relying on the root learning, you might come up with mental images to help you.
Yeah, because it is. You only use them only when necessary. For instance, like to distinguish confusing concepts that consistently trip you up. Also know that no matter how clever they are and how easy they are to remember, mnemonics usually do not contribute to understanding.
Yeah.
Their objective is to help you memorize.
Right.
And one of the kind of tricky one is like, what will help you remember math and science materials? Like a lot of people have problem with remembering like science materials, and because they say science is so complicated, but really it's not, because it's just a process, as we say. You got to review your process and procedures, and what y'all think about that? You got to do problems and more problems, because the more you do, the more you understand it. So that's basically how you approach like math and science. It's like a process, practice. You got to keep practicing. So that's how you get it.
Well, I think the problem with math when it comes to math and science is that most people find it boring. That it's kind of hard for them to focus on what they're actually doing. So it makes it hard for them to try and memorize what it is that they actually need to do. So they can't, process the information because it's a boring subject.
Yeah.
So they're just not interested. And if they're not interested, well, it's just boring, and it's just boring for them to try and learn.
That go back to what I was trying to say. Like, you got to have a purpose to study what you want to do. You got to ask yourself, what in science am I trying to learn? Why I want to learn this? So that's the way to approach it.
Yeah, books that'll teach you that stuff too. They'll tell you the principles behind it, and they're cheap. The books that explain this stuff. You can get it on Amazon for like $10.
See, that's a good tip right there. And I hope y'all are listening and learning, because this is real important information. Right, Merv?
Yes. No, it'll explain, like the books I'm talking about, it'll explain the big picture in a simple way that way it's easy to grasp. That's why most people find math and science boring, is because they just look at it, they see a bunch of numbers and letters and like, whatever.
Yeah, but you also have to use forward thinking, because in the real world there's a lot of math and science going on. You're going to need math and science to do anything.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of math inside of science. You're going to need both of them.
That's an interesting point. So this is basically, the Goonies Lounge, and this is what we do. We discuss stuff that people got a problem with, and this is what we enjoy doing. So I hope y'all learned something, and I hope y'all paid attention. So peace out.
Bye.